What's up, fucker? It's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you following Figueredo versus Joseph Benavidez, a fight that seemingly almost no one cared about, but a good fight nonetheless, and Deiveson Figueredo definitely getting a bit more of a fan following now, which has its upsides and its downsides, because I am also seeing plenty of people being like, oh my god, Deiveson Figueredo, so calculating, so cool, how is anyone going to beat him? And you're like, did you just watch the last two finishes? Is that what happened? And maybe him guillotining Tim Elliott, because he has been incredibly hit and miss in his UFC run. He wins every time, but he's just very, very messy. But, we'll kick straight into the fights. There's never any news nowadays. The news is always, the news now is that Bellator's coming back, which is great. Need more stuff going on. But we'll go straight into fights. So Deiveson Figueredo versus Joseph Benavidez. This was the rematch that not a lot of people were calling for. Didn't even feel like Joseph Benavidez was that keen on it. But he was convinced that the headbutt cost him the first fight. Most people realised that he leads with his head pretty much all the time. And in fairness to him, I thought he did a much better job of not doing that in this fight. There was a very funny moment where Figueredo was on top of him and faked a headbutt, like theatrically drew his head back and mimed a headbutt. But Benavidez opted to stay on the outside and try and use his kicking game, which is something that I would have said, yeah, that's probably a good idea, because his kicking game, he's a powerful kicker and he's a pretty quick kicker. Does very well when he switches to southpaw and throws the body kick. And that was something that I thought was missing, but like in the first fight, he very clearly favoured just running and swinging hands. And he was hitting Figueredo, but he was also leaving himself wide open and running himself onto counter shots. And most importantly, not even headbutt. We said this last time. His head connected in the way that you want your head to connect when you're trying to headbutt the other guy. Cejudo versus Benavidez, full of nodders. Benavidez versus Figueredo, just Benavidez running his head into Figueredo. And Figueredo not being stunned by it, which was even more impressive. But man, Figueredo, he was using Benavidez was using the kicks and Figueredo just timed him perfect. As he threw a low kick, Figueredo just swung in a right hand like a bat. Not a particularly technical counterpunch, but timed him on one leg, smacked him straight over the top of the head and folded him straight down in his stance. Well, not stance, one leg. And then got on top, hammered Benavidez with an elbow from like in headquarters position or splitting the guard or whatever you want to call it. Benavidez immediately turned his back. Benavidez very good at, this is something I focused on in the Filthy Casuals guide that we did a while ago, which I didn't re-upload, sorry, but they copyright claimed me for the first one. But Benavidez has been very, very good at getting to his knees any which way he can. So he'll turn into you as you would when you're trying to come up on a single from like the bottom of side control. But he'll also turn away and give up his back for like the turtle. But he also does funk rolls or passes, as they're sometimes called, where it's in wrestling. It is as the opponent takes you is performing the takedown, you dive under them and come up with one of their legs, come up to your knees with one of their legs under your armpit. In Joseph Benavidez's case, he does it a lot from like the bottom of side control. He'll grab the leg nearest his head, bridge and roll over to the other side, coming up to his knees. And in the first fight, he funk rolled right into like a reverse triangle and then an arm bar. But squirmed out of it because he's really fun to watch on the ground. Like he does a ton of interesting stuff. In the Filthy Casuals guide, we talked about how he really uses the underhook and the head wrap from top positions to get the guy to turn into him and then grab the guillotine. And then, he'll throw a leg over the arms or push them down to mount or whatever. But he uses the underhook and the head wrap really well from like half guard, side control. But yeah, that's the joy of Joseph Benavidez, watching him on the ground. However, in this one, he was on the defensive from the get-go because he'd been clattered. And he fought off, I think, 3 rear naked choke attempts, which is pretty incredible. And, there's watching Ken Shamrock try to do the rear naked choke with the hand on top of the head, like they do in the old books, against Kimbo Slice and just having his hand peeled off 4 times. But he looked like he was doing most of it right here, like trying to slide it in behind the head, hide it with his own chin. And Benavidez was just gritting his way through, grabbing something, pulling his way out of it. But they got back to their feet and Benavidez kicked and immediately got dropped again. And then it was a rear naked choke for the finish, and he got choked unconscious, which, is always grim. But, really, really kind of just the first fight, but if Figueredo had been really confident right from the get-go. I mean, Figueredo's a fascinating figure. It's going to make for an interesting title reign, however long it lasts. I think he still works as a stylist in a hair salon, but also works as a sushi chef, and has a pet bison or buffalo that he wrestles. He's just a bizarre character, but much needed in MMA and the UFC, especially as he doesn't speak English. Always sort of like a limiter on you as a star if you can't speak English. It's why, like, Francisco Trinaldo was, on an 8-fight winning streak in the deepest division in the UFC, and they didn't want to give him anyone who might get him into serious title contention. They gave him Paul Felder to try and knock him off, and he TKO'd Paul Felder. Actually, we're going to talk about him later in the week because he's got a fight coming up. And again, he's on like a 2-fight winning streak over good guys, and they've asked him to take on a debuting guy who's got a ton of hype. So you're like, what do you gain from that fight? If you win, people go, well, maybe he just wasn't a big deal. Maybe he was just a big deal outside the UFC. And if you lose, it's because you fought a monstrous, scary prospect with very little to gain from it. But yeah, old Figgy 2 belts, I'm here for it, is what I say. Does unfortunately force Demetrius Johnson into the position of third most exciting flyweight champion the UFC's ever had. But, if you enjoy that sort of thing, you can always watch him in Asia. So what else was good on this card? Jack Hermansson, I did barely even... I almost forgot to talk about this because he came out and, I was going to say he blew the doors off Kelvin Gastelum, but he didn't. There were a couple of strikes. He ducked him for a takedown. Kelvin Gastelum ragdolled him, ended up on top in his half guard. Jack Hermansson immediately went to butterfly half. And Jack Hermansson's a guy who's been pretty heavily influenced by the Danaher guys. He said that he'd been working on this seated arm triangle after learning it from a Danaher seminar, and then went and submitted 2 guys in the UFC with it. Almost got Jacare, and he almost got someone else with it too. That head and arm choke / guillotine. With Keenan calls it the hip hugger. There's loads of names for it, but guillotine, but with their arm on the same side of their body, of your body rather, as their head. But the influence of the Danaher guys was pretty obvious here, or at least the influence of the modern leg locking game. And the example I'm specifically going to reference is Gary Tonin versus Huzumar Palhares. If you're a Patreon boy, I did a big piece in the Absolute Masterclass series called Absolute Masterclass Tonin versus Palhares. And in that match, I was going to say fight match, whenever Tonin ended up in half guard, he would immediately keep Palhares' cross-facing hand off him with both hands, which is going to be important when we talk about Montel Jackson and Brett Johns later. But he would then insert the butterfly hook so that he had the butterfly half, and then if Palhares pressured into him, he would get in the armpit and roll to his back, flat to his back, so that he could swing the half guard leg over to reap the non-trapped leg in the half guard, which is what Hermansson did on his first entry in this one. He goes butterfly half guard, Kelvin pressures into him, he rolls flat to his back and pushes Kelvin up overhead by the armpit, I think. Puts the post in, as they call it, and then he swings his leg over to reap the leg. And I think that's the one that Kelvin gets out of, but then he goes Y guard or modified X, whatever you want to call it, which is where you underhook the far leg from normally like a reverse De La Riva position, so standing half guard, if you will. But you underhook the far leg, then you turn all the way through to the other side so that you're looking at, not looking away from the opponent, but facing the same way that their upper body is, and you use your knee inside their knee, and you can hit a technical stand-up from there, but he used it to push away and then swing in the leg reap over the near leg instead. And it reminded me of something that Oliveira does a lot. He will use the Y guard or the X guard to push the opponent away, and then he will switch to the 50-50 on the near leg instead of trying to wrestle up. But what was really interesting about this one was that, everyone was shocked that a heel hook happened in MMA, or in the high levels of MMA, but more shocked that it was an outside heel hook, because the outside heel hook is one that typically is not as dead to rights as the inside heel hook, and it just isn't as nasty. The inside heel hook can really fuck you up very quickly. The outside heel hook you can see guys sort of roll with for a while. Trying to think of examples, but like Masakatsu Imanari, amazing inside heel hooker, got was it Jean Silva in Cage Warriors in an outside heel hook, and they rolled like 4 times till they hit the fence. But if you compare this one to Gastelum's fight with Jacare picks up a single leg, pushes him towards the fence, and then jumps up and reaps the leg for a heel hook. And Gastelum immediately slips the knee past the knee line. So once your knee is out from between their thighs, your knee line is out from their knee line, you're pretty much gone in the heel hook, and they have to try and reclaim it or follow you up or whatever. but he slips the knee in the Jacare fight and starts turning back into Jacare, and Jacare uses that to off-balance him and come up on top, which is very cool in its own way. But in this one, he tries to slip the knee, and he doesn't. Like, Hermansson has a bite over his... I think he has his reaping leg over the top of Gastelum's knee. I can't remember the exact configuration of their legs, but the important point was that when Gastelum turned and tried to just run away from it, he just got stuck deep in it, and then he fell down in a really awkward-looking position and had to tap. But I thought it was really cool seeing Hermansson work from the bottom. To be honest, at the start of the fight, I thought it was really cool to see Gastelum hit a takedown and go from the top, but that went tits up very quickly. On the subject of leglock wins, actually, there was a knee bar in the women's fight. What was that? That was women's flyweight between Ariana Lipski and Luana Carolina, and lots of people have been sending me their more fucked up leg examples, including Craig Jones, which was hilarious. But this was a weird one, the Carolina versus Lipski one, because Carolina looked to be in like the calf slice position, which, there's been like one calf slice of this kind. Brett Johns also finished a calf slice, but facing the other direction. There's been one of this sort of coming up on the back calf slice victories in the UFC, and obviously it was Chucky Olives, Charles Oliveira. But you'll see people like the Mendez brothers, well, they're both retired now, but Buchecha, Espen and Tommy from Wolfing House do this a lot too. And the Meows, they use this a lot in Nogi. You turn up as if you were going for a knee bar from the bottom, like Mackenzie Dern did a little while ago. And you throw your leg over the back of the opponent's knee, and you use that to push them forward and start coming up on their back. Or you can turn all the way through, or they come back to face you and you end up in like a 50-50. So you see guys do this a lot in tournaments, in grappling tournaments, particularly Nogi, and I'd say more so when heel hooks are banned. And very, very few people finish with the calf slicer. It is just a way to attack the opponent's back. But Carolina ended up coming up towards finishing the calf slicer. And, one of the things that's always interesting is that, I think it was Eddie Bravo said, like, learning to footlock is you have to learn to walk through the fire. You're going to get heel hooked and footlocked and straight ankled and things a lot in the course of learning legs, because you're entangling yourself with the opponent. They are also looking at your legs while you're doing it. And if you watch like Pancrase back in the day, it's just two dudes on a toe hold at the same time, always. And that still happens in like high level BJJ tournament from time to time. But when you're talking about like good leg attacks, they kind of conform to the other high percentage submission attempts, or the really dangerous ones in jiu-jitsu elsewhere, because the general principle is that you want to isolate a limb and work as much of your body on it as possible. So like think arm bar, you're getting one arm and all your limbs are basically on that, so that you can use your whole body to isolate that one limb, which gives you the breaking strength you want, and you're fighting four limbs against one, or your back and legs and core against their arm. But more specifically, it's very hard for them to attack you when you're locked onto one of their limbs. I mean, I'm sure there's gimmicky stuff out there, but if you're on an arm bar, you're like, I'm attacking this person now, and you're not particularly worried about them toe holding you or something, or an omoplata or something like that. There's that weird ass way to try and toe hold someone across the back of your own neck. But do you get what I'm saying? Like the saddle, no one really. The 50-50 might be the exception because you are in a 50-50 position. You both have the same control and the same attacks there. But like the saddle or the cross ashy or whatever you want to call it, not really a lot of ways they can attack your feet while you're attacking theirs. I think this was basically like when you're learning to play like De La Riva and reverse De La Riva. The back step is there until you are conscious of it and like aware of it. And then people backstepping on a knee bar and doing it successfully gets to be pretty rare for you. But Carolina just sort of like forgot about her other leg. And so Lipski like sits back over the top of it and does a knee bar sitting straight upright. And I mean, she like inverts the girl's knee. So legit, as in like she legitimately got caught in a hold that really was going to fuck her up. But also like she did also legitimately forget about her own leg while attacking the other girl. Yeah, I mean, it was messy. Basically, what I'm saying is this is like when that girl caught Stamp Fairtex's kick and tried to do an inside trip, like Sanshao style, and pulled Stamp Fairtex onto her own back. And then people in the comments were like, Jesus Christ, Stamp Fairtex has got good at jiu-jitsu. In such a short time, she must be a savant. So that was the women's fight done. What else was good? Sergey Spivak. Fuck my ass. I'm not talking about Sergey Spivak. The really good ones were Arman Tsarukyan versus Davy Ramos, as we said it would probably be. But I called that completely wrong. I said, I don't think either of these guys can really sit back and just out-smooth it on the feet like Islam Makhachev did against both of them, or was able to do for periods against both of them. No, Arman Tsarukyan was like, fuck that, I'm going to sit back and out-smooth him. And he did. Beautiful combination work. Lovely use of the lead leg high kick, which honestly, I hadn't seen a lot of from Tsarukyan because he's been doing quite grappling heavy performances. Ramos was just, or Hamos, however you want to say it, was just sort of like walking forward and trying to swing. And in the third round, he started doing that, come on, stand and fight with me, which you can't do when you're getting beaten up and the guy's leaving the pocket. You know, you can try it, and they might be an idiot and stand there and bang with you. But, it's not a legitimate way to force action or keep them in the pocket to stay for exchanges. Beautiful takedowns from Tsarukyan, a couple of them in this fight, like level change all the way to knee to the floor level change, which we always say, you don't need to do that in MMA, but he did anyway. I'm just Arman Tsarukyan, exciting ass fighter. Love him. And Davy Ramos, I really think like Davy Ramos, I don't think he was on too much of a physical attribute disadvantage in this fight. In fact, I think he was stronger and more powerful than Tsarukyan. Obviously, Tsarukyan had the significant edge in like time spent wrestling, just wrestling, not like wrestling for grappling or wrestling for MMA. You know, Tsarukyan comes from that sort of background, and you could see that in like what John Smith used to call technique speed. He'd be like, I don't necessarily have to be faster than the opponent, than the other guy, or like capable of moving faster than the other guy physically. But if I have the reps and the practice and the years doing this, I know that I'm quicker on this shot than he will be defending it. And that's what I got from Tsarukyan in this one. He was tighter and he was a lot faster. He might have been slightly faster naturally, but he was a lot faster because he seemed to be beating him in technique speed. And Ramos was just loading up on bombs and walking forward. I think Ramos is capable of becoming much better than he is. I think at this point he has to take some stock and really just look at someone like Gilbert Burns and see how they changed up from just being a sort of banger to being a multifaceted threat and pretty competent and comfortable even when they're facing better technical strikers or better technical wrestlers and so on. Oh, and Rafael Fiziev or Fiziev? Fiziev or Fiziev? No, Fiziev, I think they were saying on the broadcast. Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here and say that I am, like the rest of you, horny for Fiziev. He was great. Loved him. In terms of Muay Thai, don't watch a lot of it. When I do watch it, it tends to be guys who are either already retired or already at the top of the game. So I haven't seen any of Fiziev's Muay Thai matches or MMA matches up to this point. So he was a really lovely surprise for me. Had a beast of a switch kick, which he was able to make ground with too. If you noticed that, like, a lot of people teach the switch kick as like, that's for when they stay there. And then we step up when we go over a long distance. But he was able to do the switch and make ground really well. Because Diakiese, obviously, long stance fighter, likes to fight out on the end of range and likes to pull away or drop away and look for counter punches and counter kicks. So he was already dealing with like a bigger distance and a more skittish opponent than he would typically face in a Muay Thai match, I would imagine. But he was doing absolutely beautiful work with body kicks, and they were a lot of them were hitting the arms, a lot of them were hitting like just the foot on the body, but you could see that they were giving Diakiese trouble because he wasn't able to return on them. Like there was that moment where he'd go oof, and then that's when he would have been returning on someone who didn't have that kind of horsepower on their kicks. And I thought Diakiese was very good at no-selling this stuff too, because we were talking about this with Volkanovski eating that knee in the first Holloway fight. But if you have a tough opponent, unless you catch him really good, unless you catch him like breathing in, because if you catch a dude breathing in at the right time and hit him in the body, like the toughest fighters in the world will go fetal. Like think Randy Couture versus Brandon Vera or something like that. Most of the time, the top guys are going to be able to hide the fact that they've been hit really hard in the body. Normally, from getting on their face, they'll smile. I think he said at one point, he was like, "What was that?" After he'd just been kicked in the body. But you can see it in their behavior. So like Diakiese took 2 or 3 really good switch kicks, and then he switched stances. And to Fiziev's credit, he immediately started throwing right kicks instead to land into the body. He was landing good low kicks as Diakiese put his foot in, ready to jab and punch in combination. I think, so people have been like, what's the ceiling on Fiziev? As we all do whenever someone does anything good in their first fight, and we've not really seen any of them in MMA before. Think Loma Lookboonmee. But I think Fiziev, in this one, he had quite a good opponent for his style. Not accusing anyone of like making a tailor-made matchup, but in terms of Diakiese is very much a striker, and he's very much sort of like a long stance in and out fighter. He used the clinch, pushed Fiziev to the fence, and then didn't really do anything with it. He was like, I'm not making any progress. I'll go back out to range again. And you're like, no, that's the advantage. You should have been pushing there. I think that was the second round. But yeah, once Diakiese couldn't put his foot in comfortably and was unable to throw counters off the body kicks, I think he was really sort of out of options. When you see Fiziev against someone who's maybe not as polished or not got as many pretty knockouts on the feet as Diakiese, but is willing to push forward and get the clinches and try and force him around from there, I think that'll be interesting. I think one of the things that this fight reminded me of is that I've always thought it's a good idea to have a real belt and braces defense. If you know someone's got a really top tier weapon that everyone else has struggled to deal with, so they got like a wicked left straight as a southpaw or something like that, or a brilliant jab, it's worth just overcommitting to dealing with that for the moment. I mean, obviously good fighters build off things like that, but by overcommitting, I mean set yourself up defensively to get the read on it a few times before you're worried about counter-striking. And I think body kicks are a great example, guys, with wicked body kicks. Because I saw Diakiese was trying to cut kick in this fight, go under the kick and kick the standing leg. And that's legit. Like, Sadiq Youssef, he had a bit of trouble with someone throwing low kicks at him in his Contender Series fight. Not low kicks, body kicks. And I was saying, that might be a good shout for Andre Fili against him. And Andre Fili threw a couple of good body kicks in the first round and came out for the second round, threw a body kick. Youssef immediately cut kick the standing leg out and then pushed into guard, stood over him, and took 3 minutes of the next round. And then after that's happened, you don't want to kick again, or you're certainly more reluctant to do it. But the problem is like the cut kick on a kicking opponent. When we say cut kick, I mean like counter cut kick, as opposed to you kick their leg, they pick their leg up the next time and you go underneath and kick the standing leg as they're checking. I mean countering. So like Fedor versus Krokop is a great example. And I'm specifically using Fedor versus Krokop because that was in like the third round. And up to that point, Fedor was religiously, like belt and braces, as we always say in the UK here. He'd go high guard and right leg up to check. So like not even a cross check, using his rear leg to check. Which is really like locking yourself in place, committing to defending this kick. Another great example is like Haggerty against Sameh when he won his one title. He was really concerned about Sameh's southpaw left body kick, so he committed to the cross check constantly, and like he wasn't countering off it for most of the fight and then started to pick up on it later. I think being able to fully commit to checking kicks with like the long barrier, which is like your say you're orthodox and you're dealing with a left kick, so like Diakiese was in this fight, you stand on your left leg, check with your right leg, and you have your guard nice and high and braced, and maybe you probably want to go 2 hands on the kick as opposed to trying to take it on one arm and getting your arm broken. Or you go cross check, which is lead leg pick up to come across, and then hands the same basically. But most people probably prefer a cross check because it's your weight distribution in like an MMA stance. Because, you already check low kicks by picking up your lead leg. So so most people find it easier. But just doing that for like 3 or 4 would, the guy probably won't hurt himself too badly if he's been doing this for years. But he might catch his foot on your knee, which would be great. More importantly, it says to him, you're not just going to kick him in the body. And it allows you to get their timing while not getting kicked in the body, which is probably the most important thing, because Diakiese had taken like 4 or 5 good body kicks by the time they got to the second round. And, if it takes you some time to get someone timing in, or it takes them slowing down a little bit, you're going to slow down more if they're punting you in the body successfully each time. I mean, there are other options, doing like classical catches and pulling into single leg takedowns or trying to leg drag and go behind them, using teeps or side kicks to nudge him off balance as he kicked. But I think for like anything like that, an attritive weapon like the low kicks or body kicks or anything like that, you need to be able to say, fuck it, I'm going to do the ultra safe method for this round until I start to, until I feel like my eye's in and I'm getting a read on this guy. Because in MMA, dudes are very good at making people pay for low kicks. Like think of Holloway versus Aldo or pretty much any fight, to be honest. Like dudes are very good at saying, okay, I'll let him kick me in the leg, but I'm stepping in with my right hand at the same time. Or if he kicks me in the leg, I'm immediately going to return with my right hand. Not so great at being like, I'm not going to let him kick me in the leg or in the body or whatever. And of course, you can very easily find out that his low kicks are doing more damage to your fight in the long run by jarring your leg and removing your mobility and your ability to move between one leg and the other than your even successful counterpunch is doing. But yeah, Fiziev, banger, like him, good fun. Petyan's striking coach, so obviously pretty good. What else is going on this card? Roman Dolidze versus Ibragimov was all right for a light heavyweight fight. Shades of my boy Joachim Hansen with the kick where the guy moved in too close and got a knee to the head instead of the shin for the knockdown. And then, like, he finished and no one did anything to help this guy who was on the floor while the other guy's standing over him screaming. It was really strange. The ref didn't get in, try and, remove his mouthpiece or sit him on a stool or anything. They just stood there. Might have been that feckless ref from last week. We also got a triangle submission, which is pretty bloody rare in MMA nowadays, or at least high-level MMA. That was Emir Albazi versus Malcolm Gordon. People were going on, the commentary team were going on about Malcolm Gordon striking and how he was going to get it going while he wasn't getting it going. Like, I don't think he did anything in the 4 minutes and 42 seconds of this fight, except eat strikes and then end up on the bottom and get mounted. The commentary recently, I like John Gooden, I like John Anik, I like Michael Bisping, but Paul Felder's input always makes it more cringe. I had to mute it the other week, which is like, not had to do that for a long old time, not since Bellator picked up Goldie. But Brett Johns versus Montel Jackson I thought was a good fight. I've always liked Brett Johns. He's a workman-like grappler. And he was at a severe reach and height disadvantage in this one. And he was using single leg pickups from an open stance position, whatever you want to call it, against the southpaw Jackson. So he'd put his head into the chest, pick up the single leg, and then he'd come up on the body lock, and that was really cool. Worked really nicely. And Jackson's defense in this fight was really interesting. It reminded me a lot of, I was thinking this while they were doing it in standing, and then they hit the ground and it happened again, and I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of. I was thinking of Keenan Cornelius's pancake guard, which I'm sure you can find on YouTube. It was basically him saying like, no matter how badly the opponent flattens you out as they move around your guard, if you get the cross wrist grip on the cuff, on the sleeve, and push it away with a straight arm as you turn into them, even as you're coming up to your knees, they can't put their hooks in and get on your back because you have their arm as far away from you as your arm will allow. It's kind of like you put a pin in them. You put a pin in that arm. They can't move their hips close enough to get the back properly. And Jackson did that on the ground in this one, but he was also just like getting two hands on one, breaking Johns' grip and like pushing it away, straight armed. And Johns was like trying to hold around the waist with the other arm, but being pulled away by Jackson pushing his arm out. It was really interesting. And then Joel Alvarez picked up a submission win over Joe Duffy. That was sad, and Joe Duffy retired as a result. And even in this one, like, Joe Duffy looked good, and then lost. And you're like, oh, we're getting to the Michael Johnson stage of Joe Duffy's career here. But no, now he's retired. Who knows if that stays because it's MMA, but, Duffy is a strange case. I mean, I've seen people say, like, oh, he only got attention because he beat Conor McGregor, and Conor McGregor went on to become good. But Joe Duffy was really promising. And, like, if you see his hands, even in fights like this, they look really good. And then we talk about, like, world-class boxing experience. And to be fair, he beat a load of scrubs, but that's the standard build-up for, a beginning professional boxer. But what he did do got lots of training and rounds in with very good boxing prospects and trainers. And it really showed. Like, he had a lovely jab. He would hit the body really well. He'd throw beautiful counters. If you watch his fight with Dustin Poirier, like that fight and then getting knocked out by Michael Johnson immediately after basically convinced Dustin Poirier to learn how to box. Poirier had just been wading in swinging up until that point, and Joe Duffy makes him look silly. However, there were some habits that I didn't like about Joe Duffy, like his weird hook kick and axe kick that he always threw, which didn't do anything. But he was also really good on the ground. Like, he was a genuinely very well-rounded fighter, very competent in every area of the game, and he just never got it together. And I don't know what his injury situation is like, but like since his win over Reza Madadi in 2017, he lost to James Vick by knockout in November 2017, didn't come back until March 2019, and then we haven't seen him until this week, July 2020. So he's really not been very active. It might be that he's just getting beaten up, like in training, as in taking lots of injuries, or has nagging pre-existing injuries. But whenever a guy retires young with a lot of promise, like Genki Sudo or someone like that, I always think, yep, probably injuries had a good role in the decision. Well, we got fights coming up again this weekend, and I want to get a nice big tactical guide out for the Patreon boys. So let's do a quick question, and then we'll get out of here for today. Hi Jack, cheeky two-parter. I am a southpaw, and in sparring I find myself relying heavily on my strikes from my left hand and foot, mostly the left straight and left body kick. Who are some southpaws I could study to get some new ideas on how to use my right hand? I've read your articles on Pacquiao, but as someone who practices MMA, I think some southpaw kickboxers or Muay Thai fighters might be more applicable. Part 2. I've seen Andy from School of Grappling praise the cradle for its many uses. He believes it will be the next big thing in grappling competitions. Are there any prolific users of the cradle in no-gi grappling to study? The only person who comes to mind is Neil Melanson. Thanks in advance. Hope lockdown isn't treating you too harshly. From Matt. First question first. Southpaw, right-handed southpaw work. I mean, you said you read the Manny Pacquiao stuff, but again, I can't recommend Manny Pacquiao enough because he didn't used to have much of a right hand. He used to be jab, jab, left, straight, jab, jab, left, straight. And then Freddie Roach started working with him, rounded out his game, and now, if you're punching in 3, 4, 5 punch flurries, you can't do that with one hand. But on the subject of Pacquiao, I'm specifically thinking of Pacquiao because on the boxing subreddit the other day, someone put up a clip of him working against Brandon Rios, which was about 20 seconds, but he did just about everything he does in that 20 seconds. So he goes down Rios's lead side, stepping outside the lead foot and shooting the left straight. Then he comes back the other way and throws a left hook as he steps out to the open side and comes up with a 1-2 afterwards, able to follow it up. And then, back the other way, doing a double left straight and so on. But it just showed how he uses each direction. Pacquiao would go to his right up his opponent's lead side to score the left straight and to make it hard for them to return. He'd throw like the double left straight a lot. So left straight to the chest, left straight to the head, or left straight to the solar plexus, left straight to the head rather. Occasionally he'd follow up with like a right hook over the top or a right hook to the body. But the thing about that is that while you're lining up your left straight really nicely, it does make it a bit harder to get over the lead shoulder if you're going down the lead side. Whereas if you put yourself between the opponent's legs, so you're coming up towards their belly button, so as the southpaw you step inside their lead foot and go to your left, you line up your right hand and you can throw your left hand at them. So you'll see big combination punches like Pacquiao and right-handed southpaws go up that side. Or, Andre Ward versus Chad Dawson is a great example. He's a left-handed orthodox fighter, Ward, and he was fighting a southpaw and he kept putting his lead foot down the inside of Dawson's lead foot to land the left hook. And by stepping quite deep inside the lead foot, he could not only make it so that he could off-balance Dawson when he came in and they clashed, but also that he could tighten up that left hook and really throw it down the line. So that, he maneuvered his center line inside of Dawson so that the left hook really didn't have to come in far to catch him. It's a nice, we talked about this in the Pacquiao articles. When you step out to a direction, you lengthen the strike that's coming from that direction, but you also shorten the inside arm or leg. Another great one is Miguel Cotto versus Sergio Martinez. Really steps deep. He puts his lead foot, he'll circle past the lead foot and then he'll put his lead foot back inside so deep, it's almost in Martinez's crotch when he comes over the top with the lead hook. But in terms of like Muay Thai and kickboxing style stuff, Georgia Petrosian is a nice one to look at. Saenchai occasionally does some good lead hand stuff, but both of those are quite interesting examples because they like to catch kicks, and where a lot of people like to drag the kick across themselves so that you can get access to the standing leg, which obviously Saenchai is very good at. He's knocked dudes out by throwing them to the mat. But if you drag kicks or parry front kicks to the outside of your body, you can step up the inside and use your lead hand to hit in close. And it's a nice way to get inside without being caught up in the hand fight. As the southpaw, you catch a right kick and you drag it down to your right side and step up the inside with like a right uppercut or a right hook. Or you catch a left kick, drop it where it is, or throw it to the floor where it is, and you step in, and then you're effectively both in southpaw stances. So you are the southpaw now in close range, ready to do two-handed hitting like you would be if you were an orthodox fighter against an orthodox fighter. Same is true with like front kicks. You just, instead of knocking them across the body, you knock them down the side of your body, so your opponent's falling onto you. So you've got to worry about your own defenses, but it is going to put you in close ranged two-handed hitting position. Haggerty versus Same is a great one. I've mentioned that once already on this podcast, but lots of switch kicks to the lead leg and then switching and bouncing back to his normal stance with a right straight to come down the side. I think those are a good start. And of course, we always like talking about people like Risty, using the left knee to enter from southpaw and then coming down with the right hook and combination punching off it. And of course, if you're a southpaw, throw a good left front kick and you can step in orthodox and do some weird hitting off both hands from close range. The cradle. Yeah, the cradle is one that I am hearing more and more people who are very good at grappling saying, I think the cradle is going to be a big thing in grappling. Ryan Hall, in his recent instructionals, has done a bit on cradle stuff and basically just said, this isn't a cradle instructional, but cradle is going to be important. Roger Gracie used the cradle a fair bit and cradle passes from half guard in one of his ADCC runs. I can't remember which one. Braulio Estima likes the cradle, has a new instructional out on the cradle with the gi, with the lapel. The Danaher Death Squad really like a Ashi Garami entry off the cradle. There's lots of different types of cradle. There's a really good instructional by Wade Chalice for I think it was Scientific Wrestling. It was called Killer Cradles, I think, but it was just a long-ass instructional, him talking about cradles. And he said something really interesting. He was like, when really good guys do get upset, it's not by being scored on with takedowns and things. It tends to be they get caught in a cradle and pinned. Because you are at such a mechanical disadvantage once your knee is pinched to your head. But I think the cradle's place, certainly the is it the inside or the outside cradle? One of the key places for cradles generally is going to be in passing, because it's there in the knee shield. You can get the cradle from there. And you mentioned Melanson. Melanson has some really interesting stuff. He has a great setup for the Von Flu choke from like a bicep cradle from the top of half. And having seen Ovin Prue actually force his way into Von Flu positions, I'm way more open to trying that. But I'm also quite interested in the cradle from like from the top of side, as in you catch their near leg and their head, almost like hooking the leg for the pin in professional wrestling. But that's one that Roger Gracie used to use to open the elbow to then progress to mount. But Ryan Hall has some interesting stuff on that position in his, I think that's his 50-50 instructional. I think the cradle would be a way more interesting position under rules that permit knees to the head of a downed opponent. Mark Coleman knocked out Alan Goes from the front headlock with knees, and Kevin Randleman knocked out some guys there too, I'm sure. But with the cradle, like that was, I think it was Mark Schultz rolled with Hickson Gracie back in the day before he knew what MMA was. And apparently just had him caught in a cradle for the best part of 20 minutes. And had he been able to, had it been like a fight and he was kneeing him, he'd have killed Hickson Gracie. Because there aren't a lot of good escapes for the cradle. And by a lot, I mean any, as far as I know. I think it'd be interesting if guys start, certainly in grappling, if guys start to attack effectively out of the cradle. Really, like, there's a few things that Neil Melanson does, but they're kind of like, you look at them and go, do they really work that well? The Danaher guys, as I said, enter the legs from the cradle. But again, that's sort of kind of a convoluted way to attack the legs to get a really good position on top and then dive in under the leg. But, maybe if guys get good at getting there, you'll see more people using the cradle to set up a sequence of attacks that they feel comfortable running through. Anyway, cheers, Matt. Right, that'll do us for today. I will be back later in the week to talk about these upcoming fights. I will be doing a tactical guide to Till versus Whittaker because they are both absolute boys. And I think it'll make good content. If you missed the last one, tactical guides are back. I'm doing them myself. And they have nice audio commentary / narration. And they're for the Patreon boys, so if you want to get in on that, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonepodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Jizzy for Fiziev, bless.